Heat flows in the structure. Namaste. Heat model of the mind, or rather mind and reality, is a complex model. In this model, how do various flows happen across structures is a complex phenomenon. Reflections today are on these esoteric flows in the system with Dr. Himanshu Vaid. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir, how is this heat system structured?
Any system you can conceptualize in two terms. One, what are the structural components which make up the system? And two, how processes happen in the system involving these structural elements and a few other process elements. If you take the example of a car and you ask the question, what structural components constitute a car? You can talk about the body, the engine, the air conditioner, the transmitting system, the wheels, the braking system. These are what constitute as components of the system. But all components are not active all the time. There are some components which are always passive. For example, the body, the storage boxes, these are always passive, inert. There are some which activate on demand. For example, the air conditioner or the wipers that you use in the rains. They may be inert, they may be active, regardless of whether the car is on or off. And some which become active only when the car is on. And you can talk about the engine, the carburetor, the fuel tank, the fuel system, sorry. So, and when the car starts, there is flow of the fuel, the burning of the fuel, the exhaust of the fuel, and the propulsion of the car towards the front or towards the back as the gear may be. So there is a structural aspect to it and there is a functional aspect to it. The functional aspect of how the fuel is burnt, how the energy is used, how the electricity is used, and so on. And the structural aspect of what is involved. Same is true with the psychic system. That just like a car, if you visualize a mind, then just as in a car you have the engine, you have the carburetor, you have the transmission system, and so on. What do you have in the mind? So when we look at heat or any model of the mind, there would be components of the mind. So if you take Freud, you will have id, ego, superego as the components, the structural components of the mind. If you take Jung, you will have the self, the collective unconscious with archetypes, the personal unconscious, and the persona with ego as the constituents of the mind. If you take the tantric model, you will have the chakras as the components of the mind and the prana as the process variable and the desire as the driving variable in the tantric model. And the karma also comes in. If you take Sri Aurobindo's model, then apart from all these things, you are also talking about the universal nature. So, this being the case, when the heat model of the mind is generated, like any other model, it will have its components and the components will work in some relation to each other. And they will involve some process and the process will involve some variables, some process variables. So let me just put up a diagram here to make concrete what I am trying to say. Uh, is it visible?
It is visible.
Yeah. So if you look at the if you look at this model of the mind, you will see the psychic or the self.
Sir, you are not audible.
Is it audible now?
Yes, audible.
Okay.
So we could hear you till the very first aspect of it, psyche, the self.
Yeah, self journey and the free will. And then you have the bliss layer and the karmic layer. And based upon the desire, the self journey and the karmic layer, you will have yin and yang, which will decide the gender. Whether the person is going to be a man or a woman or something else. And then you have the yin, then you have the typical constitution of the chakras. And you can see the colors of each of the chakras are based upon the traditional
The
thing.
relevant associated traditional colors.
So then you have the collective unconscious of Jung, the personal unconscious, and then the conscious. And then you have the environment. And in the environment, you always have an effect of history and culture. Okay. So this is the inside out view, right? That from the self to the desire, and obviously the same thing will be there on the other side also. Right? So I have given, let's say I have given the right hand side, then on the left hand side of the psychic, again the same thing will be there. So it will be a circular thing what I have put in a plan way. Now, what will happen is, this is the structural component. Let me list out a few more components. So just as you have the psychic being, you have the central being. And this is the absolute ground. And the central being puts in evolution the psychic being. And these are the ranges above the normal ranges of the mind. And if you reach this layer, it will be the experience of samadhi. The oceanic oneness with the ground, with everything. Because everything proceeds from this common ground, all the manifestation. Now, there are the zones of reality, because the idea is that when we incorporate East and West, in the East, the idea is that we have 7 layers of the body. And each layer is a small part borrowed from its own zone. Just as we have a physical body of 60-75 kg, out of earth, which is millions of tons of weight, we borrow a small amount of material to constitute our body. Similarly,
Right.
our emotional body also is borrowed from the emotional zone of the universe. Our thought body is borrowed from the thought zone of the universe. Our energy body is borrowed from the energy zone of the universe. So those zones are here, universal zones. And then this is the absolute reality, right? The Tripura Sundari in tantric sense. And this absolute reality puts forward a principle, one principle for each universe, and according to the principle of the universe gets created in terms of its basic laws and its process. So reality puts forward a principle, the principle puts forward the ground puts forward the zones of the universal zones, then the central being comes in, then the psychic comes in, the ranges of the mind come in, and this whole mechanism comes in. And on the lower side, you have all the gradual ranges to the inconscious. Just on the higher side, you have above mind ranges. On the lower side, you have below the consciousness ranges. All credits to Sri Aurobindo on this. And then you have the inconscient, the kingdom of the great king of the inconscient. And this is just to make a note that when this structural system, when it gets involved in a process, some process happens in this structural system, the process material is spread all over. For example, life energy, affinity, various variables which are involved in the processes, all those consumables, so to say, they are spread all over the system. So this is the structural system in the context of which we are trying to look at the movements, how psychological movements happen in this system. Just as in Freud.
So,
Please.
for example, if I want to see manifestation of some animal body, not the human body,
Hmm.
they're borrowing certain things from the universe, and then there is this manifestation of the body and chakras in a different format.
Hmm.
Where would it differ from a human being? At what level, if
Hmm.
at all, it is applicable here? I'm just trying to see if there is a form of energy which is based on their karmic evolution, soul purpose, and all those stuff. Once it is into these sections, where it is taken to the other root of some other lower life force of that of a reptile or that, where exactly it bifurcates.
Okay, so it's a difficult question, but good that it has come up. The differences will be throughout. For example,
True.
the psychic being is actually in evolution. So in very low evolutionary stage animals, this is not completely crystallized. They have more or less
Mm.
collective consciousness. For example, worms or certain forms of bacteria or viruses, they evolve together as though they are connected by some tube or something.
Mm.
Like when you see mutation, you don't see mutation in 3 or 4 viruses. Suddenly you see mutation in thousands of viruses.
True. True.
Right? So there is some sort of a collective consciousness there, some collective force working. So the psychic is not completely crystallized. It is still in the formative stages. It is not completely individualized. So the psychic is actually still in the formation or spread out. It's a kind of a proto-psychic, so to say.
Mm.
Then we have
Amazing.
the self journey. The self journey component is very low. Primarily, it is the karmic thing which is driving the lower species. And as you approach more and more towards the humans, say for example mammals, this will start resembling more and more the human constitution. Like if you look at cats and dogs or cows and elephants or certain forms of dolphins, this is very, very near to their system. So if you, for example, if you look at a cat or a cow or a dog, they would be feeling a lot of it, and you will almost feel as though they have by and large all the chakras. They would also have yin and yang, right? And there'll be two components here. One, who are in that form for the first time,
Mm.
and those who are there after going up and coming back.
Mm.
So they would have very different experience, because those who have gone up and come back, in their case, this part will be far higher, and some of them will remember the karmic component.
Okay.
Now, what will happen in their case is the development of the Agnya chakra, the development of the heart chakra, development of Sahasrara chakra, the development of the conscious mind and the conscious part of this layer. Right? The effect of history and culture, this will not be there. So this, I mean, this will be, sorry, let me rephrase it. The higher chakras, they will be
Yeah.
less developed than in human case, and the effect of history and culture will be practically negligible. There will be some internalization, some learning passing through the genes, but it will not be as much as we see in the human context where it's passed on consciously from one generation to the next. So this would be the differences. And of course, if you don't believe in the collective unconscious, right, then the moment you go to the animals, you will have to start believing, because they have a very large component of automated working.
True.
So one second, the personal unconscious also is there, but it will not be as much as in human beings, because the repression will be less, acting out will be more. So this will be one. Second, the flow from the universal nature will be very high compared to us, right? And the ability to go to the bliss layer will be lesser than we have, except when the season changes and naturally they go to this layer, or they get a good sleep without any fear. The conscious ability is very low compared to human beings. In fact, human beings also have very low capability, but they are even less when it comes to conscious going back. But the natural going back possibly may be even higher than human beings, at least in the higher mammals, not so much in reptiles. And the effect of the inconscient part will be higher than in case of human beings. Lastly, the ability to go in the ranges above the mind or to go into samadhi, that is much lesser. Human beings also have very less capability. They will be even lesser. So that is how this will get customized to lower forms in evolution.
So, at what stage exactly people who are, if we see this structural model, if people who are on faster, accelerated version of their spiritual growth, where exactly, of course, fundamentally at every level, where exactly the major changes takes place towards the end 5 or 10 years where they're reaching enlightenment, where exactly in the structure would the changes take place?
So what will happen is the desire component will start going lower. Self journey component will start going higher. The karmic component will be washed out more quickly, and that may even create a more troublesome life. And the higher chakras will start activating more. And the moment they activate more and they supersede the lower chakras, the desire for social uh, satisfaction, I mean, the social flavor of desire will go down, and the desires turn slowly more towards intellectual, philosophical, and spiritual orientations. And then what happens is these layers start getting more active because they have to be emptied out very soon. And the effect of environment slowly lowers down compared to an average individual. And then you are living more inside out than outside in. And in the more advanced stages, the psychic takes over, what is called the psychicization of life, that the psychic takes over the control. And if the will does something, it does not happen. Only when the will surrenders, whatever has to happen that happens. So there is a play then between the will and the psychic, or the will and destiny. And the will loses out, and slowly one gets more and more into the surrender mode. And then the psychic takes over more and more. And the more
So
psychic
does
takes
that
over,
mean the autonomy of this entire flow becomes starts taking over from somewhere more higher level of structures than to these?
yeah. So one is the horizontal movement, the psychic taking over, the psychicization. And second is the
Right.
vertical movement of spirituality, where higher than higher than mind ranges, from there forces start coming down and slowly transforming the chakras one by one. So there are two movements, a horizontal movement of psychicization and a vertical movement of spiritualization. And both of them, they undergo the churn the system, and it is not easy. It is not like a white color washing off everything. Because when that pressure comes on these chakras and all that is there in the collective and personal unconscious, and the guilt and the karma and all the wrongdoings of the past, and that whole cauldron of the unconscious collection, then all of it comes out. It's like throwing a light spear, a heavy light spear into mud, all the mud splashes out. And that is the difficult time. And therefore, it is not an easy movement. It is not a happy movement always. And it is also not a straight line movement. It's a upwardly moving spiral.
Okay.
That you will have ups and downs, but on the whole, the spiral will be moving upwards. So if you draw the line from the center of the spirals, it will be a upward moving line, but the spiral will be going up and down. It's an upwardly moving spiral. That is the typical movement of the sadhana. And at a more advanced level, it happens by itself. It takes you over.
Yeah, that's what I said. After all of these processes, the autonomy of the will and desire also dissolves, and then it is governed by something much universal
Good question. I mean,
power.
the question is good. It may take us one more session, but I think it's worth it. Um, if you look at the 4 stages of sadhana of Sri Aurobindo and you try to understand in this model, it will be like this. The first attainment will be the experience of no thought, high awareness, and bliss, which means the Agnya Chakra will go silent and bliss will be felt from the Sahasra Chakra coming down. And there is pure awareness and bliss. Right? Stage 1. Stage 2 will be experience of the psychic, where you consciously experience this. Stage 3 will be experience consciously the this
Central being.
central, this layer, which is the universal oneness, samadhi. And then 4th stage, experience these ranges and bring them down and make them operate 24/7 into your system. Right? So experience is this above mind states is what is called ascent. You go up and experience it, but they don't become 24/7 operative. When you come down, you lose it. And then when you want them to become 24/7 reality, you ascend and you descend. Now the descent is even more difficult because there is resistance from the entire nature here.
Yes.
This does not want to change. So descent is very difficult. And if the descent is complete, then the whole system is transformed.
The fixation is to the flow, or still there is a desire to be held in the blissful state?
Both. There is a personal resistance and there is a universal resistance. So one at this level, there are resistances. And if you look at the universal zones and the universal flow of things, is resistance from the universal nature also. So from both these things, the flow of resistance will happen. So since we are talking about the movements and the flow today, right, the flow will happen in terms of resistance from personal unconscious, collective unconscious, even personal from the conscious, as well as from the desire, and also the flow will happen from here into the system, from universal nature, for the system not to change. And there is one will in system which wants to change. So the psychic wants to change, and the desires, the rigidities, the fears here, as well as universal nature, they don't want to change. So those are the difficulties of sadhana. We are still on the first question. Never mind, go on. It's an interesting subject.
Yeah, I know you repeatedly you're using a word flow and it refers just not to the life force, many other aspects. So what are these various flows happening in this heat system we are referring to again and again?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, if I talk of a car, the flow is of the fuel. The fuel goes from the fuel tank to the engine, burns, gives energy to the engine, becomes a gas and goes out from the silencer. Similarly, there is a flow of electricity, right? That somewhere it is generated from the engine, from the battery, goes into the engine or the AC or the car or the light or the horn, and there is this flow. So similarly, what are the flows here? Right? You can talk of the process flows and you can talk of the elemental flows. So today we'll focus on the process flows.
All
Right?
right.
Not the elementals which are used in the process, they will have their own flow. But let us look at the process flow. So let us say we look at 4 or 5 basic flows. Right? One, flow from stimulus in the environment into the system. Second, flow from the system to that stimulus as a response. Like for example, you are standing in front of somebody and that stimulus comes in. So how does that flow in terms of this model? And then you give a response to that person or whatever he's saying. It is inside out. How does the response flow out of this system? Okay. So there is a flow in, there is a flow out. Then there is a flow of something generated in the system as a fantasy. That the environment is nothing, you are sitting alone and the fantasy is generated. So how does that fantasy generated inside flow into the system? The fourth is, how does a symptom flow out of a trauma in this system? Right? That a trauma is located somewhere in the system and from there a symptom is created. So how does the flow happen from that trauma to the system, to the symptom? The fifth is, how does the karmic layer affect other layers? How does the flow happen from the karmic layer to the chakras, to the collective unconscious, to the personal unconscious, and so on? The flow from this layer to here, the flow from this layer to here, the flow from this layer to here, the flow from this layer to here. Right? And how does the flow from the universal nature happen into this system? Okay, how does this flow into this or this or this? How does that happen? And last is, what is the flow responsible for creation of the trauma or healing of the trauma? So how do we conceptualize the process of formation of a trauma or healing of the trauma in the context of these systems? These are the major processes whose flow we will see. Right? And let us take up one example, the flow from stimulus to the inside system. Okay? Let us say I am traveling by train and I go to the railway station and the TT says ticket, I show him the ticket and I put it back. It's a very rational kind of interaction. Right? So let us say the stimulus is asking for ticket, I show it and I put it back. So the stimulus comes from the environment and it goes to my personal conscious and it goes back from there. I don't have to involve what happened to me at 3 years of age or 4 years of age. Right? So the flow is from environment, stimulus comes, goes back. So if you talk of outside inflow, it is from environment to the personal conscious, that's it. If you talk of outside inside outflow, it is from the personal, it is from the conscious to the environment, it goes away. Now there can be a second kind of flow where I see a picture of my school friend. So in the environment, I see a picture of my school friend, then the stimulus goes in, but it does not stop at my personal conscious. It goes into my personal unconscious, awakening my memories. And from there, some material is taken, goes back to my conscious and again goes back.
So
So
it is a bilateral flow, and it
it's a
varies
it's a flow
for the
involving two layers,
stimulus.
conscious and personal unconscious. Now let us say I see the photograph of a shaman, and
Hmm.
it involves the healer archetype of the collective unconscious also. So the flow will be from here to here to here to here, and taking material again this. Now the interesting part is, in this model there are open spaces if you see. So it is possible for some material to come from here, go to my personal my conscious, my instead of going to the personal unconscious, it takes this open space and goes to my collective unconscious. So there are open spaces to evade certain layers. This is a difference from Freud and Jung's model. There are no open spaces there. Right? So different materials will go flow through different layers involving material of those layers. Right? And we can see that in dreams also. In some dreams, you will have
Yes,
material only from this and this, or some this and this, but this will be evaded.
evaded.
So we can see the evasion, that you can have collective unconscious material evading the personal unconscious, which means there has to be open space.
A
So
bypass,
a
probably.
bypass, you can have open spaces. So this is how the material flow, the process flow is happening. So the first
So
flow
if
that
we,
we took off was outside in, right, flow, and you can see it can just go to the conscious, or it may go conscious to personal unconscious, or conscious to personal unconscious to collective unconscious, or straight to the chakra also, or you can go from environment to personal unconscious, sorry, conscious, evade the personal unconscious, go into the collective unconscious and the chakra. So all these are
uh,
possibilities of the flow of this. The first process we are talking, outside in. We'll also talk about inside out in a few minutes. Yeah, please go on.
so when we see these gaps, for many individuals, as a therapist, I have observed these bypasses are not there. There is a closed doorway, not reaching to the collective unconscious at all in the existing pathology, whatever they're in. So that means the other flows can be the blockages for the life force. For example, if there's a trauma flowing, right, of some event of life, so there can be blockages formed by those overflowing stimulus that can create the pathology. If we see what governs this opening and closing of these pathways or bypasses,
Right. So you can have
what it
blockages.
would be.
Yeah, you can have blockages, or it may just be a necessity to avoid certain things for the system.
In the psyche, I understand how it would be, but for the if we see the collective life force,
Hmm.
um, karmic flow can also stop certain things.
Correct. So what will happen is, this karmic layer will also have an influence on the response that you are giving to the flow coming inside. So the whatever comes inside, when the response is to be given, we will see that this layer also puts an effect and creates certain material in collective unconscious and personal unconscious. And those material which is created by the karmic layer, which is put here, and also in the chakras, those elements, they make a heavy bearing on material which is coming in trying to go out. For example, let us say you are making the correct interpretation but the healing is not happening. Right? The diagnosis is correct, the healing method is correct, the interpretation is correct, but it is not moving because the karmic load is very heavy. So what will happen is when what you give as an interpretation, it collides with the core traumatic complex, right? The healing process, the moment it starts, something from the karmic load comes and puts it down. And when I look at the karmic flow, there is one of the questions in which we will go into it. It's an important aspect of it. I'll make use of the second diagram, the structure of the core trauma, right? And how inside it the flow happens and how this karmic layer puts an effect on that flow. So the way this is constituted, the chakras, the collective and personal unconscious, right? And the way the processing happens here is very much influenced by the karmic layer. This area is not free of karmic load or the load of self journey. We feel they are
Amazing.
free, they are not free.
And at the same time, just the way we see these blockages there towards the flow, there is also express highways in people who are more aware and consciously living. There is these express highway where this just goes beyond certain things.
All
Beautiful,
free.
beautiful structure, sir. Beautiful.
1 minute to go. We'll have to reconnect in the second part. We'll continue with the discussion.
See you in part two.